Good to have you back again, and happy to have the opportunity to showcase another great Australian film, admittedly from a difficult period in Australia's filmmaking history. It is from the most important filmmaker of the time, a World War I story made during the Second World War that helped launch the career of perhaps the most iconic Australian actor of the 40s and 50s. It is 40,000 Horsemen from 1941. Story and how that story is told is an important, perhaps a critical element of all films. And from the perspective of a nation's narrative during a time of war, it is both more interesting and more revealing. This film tells the story of the Australian Light Horse, a mounted rifleman unit which operated in the desert at the Sinai and the Palestine campaign during World War I. It follows the adventures of three rowdy heroes, and the film culminates at the Battle of Beersheba, which is reputedly the last successful cavalry charge in history. The film was clearly used as propaganda to aid recruitment and to lift spirits of Australians at home during the World War II. It was one of the most successful Australian movies of its day, and the film's prologue is quite instructive. When Germany stretched greedy hands towards the Middle East in the war of 1914 to 1918, a great cavalry force came into being. They were the men from Australia and New Zealand, the Anzacs, the Mad Bushmen, the men from down under. Call them what you will, their glories can never grow dim. They met the Germanised army in the burning desert of Sinai. They fought and suffered to emerge triumphant, the greatest cavalry force of modern times. To these dauntless riders and their gallant horses, this story is dedicated. To them with pride, their own sons are saying today, "The torch you threw to us, we caught, and now our hands will hold it high. Its glorious light will never die." The film's director, Chauvel, had been making films since the 1920s and had done several stints working in Hollywood, learning and honing his craft. Funding was always difficult to come by, and it was even more challenging during time of war. Chauvel was an innovator, far ahead of his time. Contemporary filmmakers will today make short films as a proof of concept in order to attract funding to make a feature film, and that's exactly what Chauvel did. On a budget of £5,000, he shot a teaser, a sequence consisting of a cavalry charge based around the Battle of Beersheba. The cost of this was paid for by Herc McIntyre, who was the managing director of Universal Pictures in Australia at the time, and who was a long-time friend and associate of Chauvel's. In 1939, Chauvel and McIntyre formed Famous Films Limited to make the movie, using the footage they had shot to raise interest among the financiers for the additional £25,000 that they needed. £5,000 was provided by McIntyre and £10,000 from Hoyt's Cinemas. The New South Wales government agreed to guarantee a bank overdraft of £15,000, although they did not invest directly in the movie. Chauvel had long planned a film based on the exploits of the Light Horse, originally to be titled Thunder Over the Desert. Among those who saw the film on its US release was a young Clint Eastwood. Its dialogue contained a few mild, but in those days shocking cuss words. Clint remembers going to the cinema with his family to see the film, and when the first hell or damn was heard, being aware of respectable citizens leaving the theatre. The Eastwoods also left, but Clint remembers, "I snuck back later because I wanted to see the whole movie. It had a lot of action, horses and lances and what have you." Despite what a young Clint thought he saw, there were no sabres or lances. The charges occurred with the soldiers holding their bayonets. According to Charles Chauvel's family, live ammunition was used in the filming of the charge of Beersheba, but no one was injured. Also, the cavalry charge scene would necessitate the falling of horses, and using tripwires would have injured the horses, so Chauvel contacted the RSPCA for advice. With their cooperation and the skill of the stunt crew, no horse was injured in the scene either. This film marked the first lead role for Grant Taylor, who rose to prominence in Dad Right MP back in 1940. Film Link magazine later wrote, "The film was Taylor's. There had been other notable leading men in Australian films, Snowy Baker, Errol Flynn, but it was really Taylor who was the first tough Aussie star type. That would be so exemplified by Rod Taylor, who was no relation, Jack Thompson, Mel Gibson and Brian Brown." Chips Rafferty, who later became the biggest star in this difficult period of Australian cinema, appeared in his first sizable role in this film, having been cast after a screen test. Chauvel described him as a cross between Slim Somerville and James Stewart, and has a variety of droll yet natural humour. Betty Bryant was another sensational debutante, having been discovered by Elsa Chauvel following a number of small roles in other films. Shooting began in May 1940. Interiors were shot over a 3-month period in the Cinesound studios at Bondi, which Chauvel had leased from Cinesound Productions. A second unit was used to build a desert village at Cronulla, where battle scenes were shot using the 1st Light Horse Machine Gun Regiment. Following the film's preview, Commonwealth Film Censors requested 3 major cuts: the display of the dancing girls in a cabaret, the love scene between Red and Juliet in a hut, and the scenes of the falling horses, which looked so realistic, cruelty was assumed. Charles Chauvel personally invited the Minister for Customs to see the film and decide for himself. The film was passed uncut and eventually broke all box office records for the time. Reviews were overwhelmingly positive. The critic from the Sydney Morning Herald claimed that there have been some good Australian films before this one, but 40,000 Horsemen has every right to be regarded as the first really great Australian picture. It was a massive success at the box office, grossing £10,000 within its first 3 weeks of release. The film was seen by 287,000 people in Sydney alone in a 10-week run on its first release. The female lead, Betty Bryant, was sent to Singapore for the film's premiere in 1941. While there, she met MGM executive Maurice Silverstein, who she would later marry, leading to her retirement from acting. Up until that time, she had been seen as a rising star, and there was serious interest in casting her in a number of major Hollywood films. The movie was released in the US by Sherman S. Krellberg for Monogram Pictures and was very well received. The Los Angeles Times says the film was conventional in formula but enlivened by stirring battle scenes and new faces. It contains all colour and lusty vigour of the men themselves, said the Washington Post, despite it being a black and white picture. It earned over £40,000 in the UK, and in 1954 the film was cut down to 50 minutes for screening on US television. Now, a lot of reasons to watch this particular film. It's an interesting period piece from the Second World War, obviously propaganda, but at the same time a fairly stirring story about the wartime exploits of the Anzacs in the First World War. Great performances by Grant Taylor, Chips Rafferty and Betty Bryant, all worth seeing on the screen. Some really moving moments and again, some action, as Clint Eastwood said, which was really enjoyable to watch. So, what I'd suggest you do is go to our website, find the link to this particular film, click on it and watch it, see what you think, and as always, we'd love you to come back, let everyone else know what you thought about this film and whether you would recommend it for others. And then we'll see you back in the not too distant future for another Classic Films review. Catch you next time.